Okay, today I'm going to show you how to configure blood splatter within Cultist. So what we have here is a level that has been configured to support blood splatter. If you take a look at the grid, the tile maps that we use, specifically we're going to be taking a look at this room, you will see that we are actually using a custom material called tile map Sprite mask. What this essentially does is allow us to use the tile map shape as a mask. So as an example, what we have is we have a splat prefab. Looks like this. Here's the actual prefab. And here's what it looks like. And this splat is actually only visible inside of a mask object. So since this is inside of the tile map, it is visible. And you can see we actually configure this by layer, so I can turn this off and that will vanish. And of course we have background objects such as these. But this you can see is using a default shader, so it is not a mask. So if I was to take this splat object and move it up, you'll see it vanishes. And the reason we do this is so we can create an effect on the side here. You can duplicate this where you can get this nice splatter effect. So in order for this to work, we have to configure each tile map to work with this material. And we do the same thing for one-way platforms. So you can see this has also been configured. We don't do it for hazards. That's more for toxic pits or liquid. These objects, we don't want it to be on the background, so we also use the default shader for these, and same with background as well. So that can be quite tedious because there's actually a lot of different rooms to configure. So what I've done is I've created a tool. Let me just close it so we can just start fresh with it. If you go to the tools drop down and you go to level, you'll see there's actually an option for configure tile maps. And this is a very simple tool right now. We may end up adding some more settings to it in the future when we need to do specific things with tile maps. But for now it serves as an easy way to apply a material and also change the type of collision. What I've noticed is a lot of these colliders are actually set to triggers. Now I've already taken the liberty of applying the changes to this. On the composite collider you'll see that it's actually highlighted here. If I right click it will say like apply. If I revert this you'll see it's actually a trigger. And let's actually go ahead and revert this as well, the material, just so I could show you how this works. And I'm going to open up the console because we do get messages when we apply this. So inside this window we have three things we need to configure. The first drop down is the layer. So every grid in our scene has a specific layer. Specifically we are targeting the ground, platforms, and one-way platforms. These are the three solid colliders or tile maps that we want to splatter our decal on. And I'm going to keep isTrigger unchecked because the way the particle system works is it's looking for collision, not triggers. So we want to make sure that we set them to non-triggers. So if we keep this unchecked, it will actually go through and make sure that they are solid colliders. And then for the material, you want to use the tile map. I'd like to type in tile map, and you'll see there's one called tile map Sprite mask, which turns the tile map into a mask. Once those three things are configured, you can click update, and it will go through and it will tell you all the different tile maps that it has updated, and you can see most of them are one-way platforms, ground, one-way platforms, ground. And you can actually click these messages and it will actually show you the ones that it updated. So that's very nice. Now that that has been configured, enemies such as the minions, when they emit a particle effect, the splat objects will appear on the surfaces. So let's show that real quick. So for this purpose, I have actually given this minion 12 health, so I can actually shoot him multiple times. You can see he splatters blood when I shoot him, and then when he dies, he splatters a bigger particle system, and more blood is scattered over the level. And of course, the player, if you die, he also splatters blood over the level, which can create quite a gruesome scene if you die quite a bit in this. You'll see that it tries to not splatter the same area. We can tweak those numbers. Looks like it's not distributing it enough. But let me jump into that next. So how do we configure a character to splatter blood? Let's actually take a look at the Cultist. So I'm going to open up this character in prefab mode. So every character in our game has the capabilities of using death feedbacks and damage feedbacks. If you go to the inspector and you locate the health component on the character, you'll see there's actually two fields, one for damage feedbacks and one for death feedbacks. And these are associated to these two game objects in the hierarchy. Let's take a look at damage. In the damage feedbacks inspector, you'll see that we actually do a couple things when the player is hit. We shake the camera, we play a sound effect, we flicker his graphics. This is like a flash. And then the important one is we play a particle effect. And it's pretty easy to add new ones. You can actually come down here to add new feedback, and you can select particles play. You can also do instantiation. I like doing play because you don't have to spawn something into the scene. But instantiation allows you to actually spawn multiples if that's what you're going for. In our case, we're using particles play. And the only thing that I had to configure was the bound particle system, which actually points to blood hit. There's a couple other things you can tweak here, but the default settings worked fine for my needs. So when the player is hit, what we do is we actually play this effect. And we can tweak that here, of course. This is just a separate particle system. By default, this system is set to not play, so you have to trigger it in order for it to play. And as you've probably noticed, it's actually a prefab. So if we click into this, you can see that this prefab is actually used for not only the player, but for the minions. So this is how you can get some consistency with your particle systems. If we collapse this particle system, you'll see that we're using two components. We are using the splat particle script, which controls the color and the size of the splat. It also makes sure to set the correct decal mask, which we're using decal in this case. The other thing that's important to note here is we use an object pooler. This is actually required by splat particles, and this will create a heap for all splat effects. So that's how we've configured this, and you'll see it's actually pointing to that prefab that we were looking at earlier. So the particle system is a prefab. You can reuse this. You can make your own if you would like. It just requires these two components. So this is the effect we play on hit. We also have death feedbacks, and you can see we're doing the same exact thing. We're calling particles play, and we're triggering the blood death particle system, which works just like that. It's a little bigger, a little flashier. It has the same exact thing. It has a splat particles component, and it also uses an object pooler. You'll notice too that we're using mutualized weighting pools. What this does is if it's the same exact heap, it will actually try to reuse the same pool. So if the player's hit or if they die, the same splat effect is actually in the same exact pool. So I think you get a little message here when you highlight, maybe not, but that's what it does. It just makes one pool for everything. So we have that checked. So yeah, just to summarize, health component has damage feedbacks, death feedbacks. You create those components. You can do all sorts of things, play sound effects. In our case, we're trying to play particles. And then, of course, you can associate the particles to the player, and you can actually position them in particular spots if you would like. I have them in the center. That seems to work pretty well. And that is how you configure a character. And just to show you that it's the same for the peeler, if we go inside here, you'll see that he also has the same exact thing. Death feedbacks, damage feedbacks, and the 2 particle effects. And since the minions are all based on one another, if you go to the flayed minion folder, you'll see that all these characters, if we open up this one for example, they actually share the same prefab as the peeler. So that's very cool. You can see that they've all been updated to have this effect. So that is how you configure your scene to accept blood splatter, and that is how you also configure characters to play the blood effects when they are damaged. Hopefully this was helpful.